Welcome to the Vaccination Station. My name is Dave, and today I'm interviewing Vanessa. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Gutierrez. I'm a YouTuber and I live in Colombia.
Vanessa, let's start by getting to know you. Can you tell me 3 things about yourself that you think the audience would find interesting?
Well, with the pandemic, I finished my degree in dramatic arts with focus on musical theater. I finished it online and I'm trying to get a job, but it's hard.
Vanessa, what's your experience with vaccines? Were you vaccinated as a child?
Yes, I
And
have all the vaccinations, I guess.
so your parents were supportive of vaccines. They felt that was an important thing to do.
Exactly.
What's the general attitude towards vaccines in Colombian society, do you think?
I think, in general opinion, people support vaccines. There are a few others that are kind of skeptical about it, but most of the people agree with vaccination.
What are some of the diseases do you think that vaccines have been particularly useful at stopping or at least reducing?
Oh, I I think the malaria, like it's a Colombian person discovered the vaccine for that.
Yeah, it's taken a long time, but we finally have a vaccine for malaria. It's only recently been developed, you're right, and it's showing extremely good results. So we've got good hopes that will finally make it much easier to combat. But what about some other diseases that you might be less familiar with? What about polio? Have you ever met someone who's had polio?
No,
No? Okay. What about smallpox?
no,
No? Okay. What about diphtheria?
no,
Tuberculosis?
no.
So on a day-to-day basis, you wouldn't really experience too many people who've had a vaccine preventable disease?
No. Well, for cancer, like, yeah, there is a vaccination for some type of cancer.
Yeah, the HPV vaccine protects against a
Yeah.
wide range of cancers, mainly cervical cancer. So that's been an extremely important one. And studies have shown that it has massively reduced the incidence of cervical cancers and some other related cancers in
Mhm.
adult populations. So that has been extremely effective. The reason I asked about smallpox is because that is one disease that's been completely eliminated from the planet by vaccines. That was declared eliminated in around I think 1977, and the last documented case was in the 70s, and then it was finally officially declared eradicated in 1982. And that is something that had never been achieved before, the eradication of an entire virus by vaccination. And smallpox had been around for thousands of years, and humans had been at the mercy of it for all that time. And vaccination managed to stop it within, I don't know, within about 10 generations, I think, maybe less than that. So that's a real testament to the power of vaccination to stop viruses in their tracks and actually make life better for everyone. The reason I asked about polio, of course, is that's another one that's been mostly eradicated from most countries. It still crops up in some developing countries where they've got problems with vaccine hesitancy and problems with resources and getting vaccines to people who need them. But in the vast majority of countries around the world, most people today, most young people today, wouldn't know someone who's even caught polio because it just hasn't been an issue. I have a friend who has polio, and his legs were permanently damaged by it. But he's Italian, and he belongs to a much older generation that was around when, before the vaccine was developed and then made more widely available. So whenever I think of the power of vaccines, I just think back to my friend Mario and say, look, this is what happened in the days when we didn't have these vaccines, and it's a pretty sobering reality. So, with regard to vaccines, what do you know about how vaccines work?
I know that they put part of the disease so the body can fight like the virus.
Yeah, that's basically it. And there's two main ways to do this. They will take part of the virus that's still alive and they will put it in the vaccine, and that's called a live vaccine because it's got a piece of live virus in it. And then the body encounters that and quickly overwhelms it and learns how to fight it. And then there's other vaccines which are inactivated vaccines which don't have any live component whatsoever, and they just have a bit of the virus so that there's enough of it for the body to recognize, and then the body takes care of it and is permanently trained to fight it when it sees it again. And it's a very efficient way of making sure that the body is trained to fight off a virus without having to actually be infected by it and suffer all the consequences of that. But more recently, to battle the COVID pandemic, we've seen the emergence of a new type of vaccine, the mRNA vaccine. Do you know anything about those?
No.
Okay, well, the mRNA vaccine is based on a very specific type of gene technology. It's based on part of our cell factory called mRNA, and that's messenger RNA that gives the body instructions about how to make things. So the mRNA vaccine contains the instructions on how to make the little protein, the protein part of the virus that causes the infection. And so it sends that information to the cells, and then the cells make that protein. But because that protein doesn't have any infecting ability, it can't actually infect the host and damage them. But all it does, it's basically like showing a blueprint of the virus to the immune system, and the immune system goes, okay, so I know that I have to fight that thing when I see it again, and it trains the immune system to do that, and then that little protein just breaks down harmlessly, and the body doesn't have to worry about it anymore. So it's actually a way of training the immune system to resist a virus without even introducing the actual virus or even a part of the virus. It's just basically like a photocopy of the virus. So
Wow.
that is really, really sophisticated technology, and
I know.
yeah, it's really amazing, and it's only been possible because we now understand how these different parts of the cell and immune system talk to each other. That's a very exciting technology and opens up the possibility of using that same technology against other diseases that we're working on over time. Moving on to the pandemic, how has it affected Colombia?
Well, it has affected a lot of small business, especially because with quarantine, they had to close them. And people in general had to change their schedules. Like there are more online jobs, but a lot of people lost their jobs. And I finished college, so I like it was the worst moment because not jobs at all. And I guess a lot of people was in the same situation as me.
What measures has the government taken against the pandemic?
Well, the quarantine, like they put curfews. Like right now, we're in a curfew. What else? Social distancing. Like it's mandatory to wear mask
Is mask wearing mandatory everywhere or only in certain
everywhere,
places?
everywhere. And they put something called pico y cédula, which means that it depends of the number of our ID, so we can go outside certain days.
Have they shut schools at all, or have they kept the schools
Yeah,
open?
yeah. Schools are virtually the same as college. Like right now, they're like kind of changing that again.
That they're starting to open up a bit.
Yeah, some days they go. to school, but other days they stay at home virtually.
What are the times for the curfew then?
Well, it has changed a lot. Like until last month, it was from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. But right now it's from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. And sometimes on weekends, the whole weekend, we have curfew. Sometimes not. Kind of changes.
What's the current state of the pandemic in Colombia? What sort of case numbers and fatality numbers are you seeing over
Well,
there?
I actually don't know. I used to watch a lot of news about that, but I got anxiety, like real anxiety. I was depressed, like I'm gonna die. So I prefer not to know exactly numbers, but I know right now a lot of people like are dying because with them with them protests, like there are more cases, so the hospitals are full.
How is Colombia's healthcare system coping with the strain of the cases produced by the pandemic?
Colombia wasn't prepared to face a pandemic. Like uh, they they are trying to do their best, but like we don't have the facilities that, for example, Spain had, and they had a lot of problems because of COVID cases. So imagine us.
Colombia has started rolling out the vaccine for COVID-19. Do you know where they source their vaccines from and which vaccines they are using?
They're using Pfizer. They're using Arsenica, I think.
AstraZeneca.
Yeah, that. Sorry. As far as I know, those two because they chose not to use Johnson and Johnson because of some defect.
Yeah, there was a concern about possible reactions with the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, and the rollout for that vaccine was temporarily paused in the US while they assessed the evidence, and it's been restarted because they've concluded that the vaccine is safe after all. Australia has also bought the AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines. And what our government has done is recommended AstraZeneca for over 50 and the Pfizer for under 50. So I will be getting the Pfizer when my
Hmm.
turn rolls up,
I
probably
guess
around June.
here, like they use Pfizer for the medical care, but and they use it that first. But right now, they don't have as much as that one, so they're gonna use AstraZeneca.
How do you think the public perception of the pandemic has changed over time in Colombia? What was the initial reaction to the pandemic when it first?
At the beginning, people were like, "This is the end of the world." They were buying a lot of toilet papers. I don't know why. It's crazy. Like they respected a lot the first quarantine. Like nobody was outside. It was kind of scary, and then people got tired, so they're not respecting it anymore. Even though, like, I know some people who have family members who die or got the coronavirus, but they don't care anymore.
Yeah, there's been a similar situation across the world. I think the initial shock is, we don't, because it's a new virus, we don't know how it's going to affect us. We don't know how quickly it will spread. We don't know if it survives on surfaces for a while. So in the initial months, it was very confusing and worrying, and everyone was a bit paranoid about what you could and couldn't do, and advice varied, and advice from professionals changed as they acquired more information about the virus. And then, as you say, people started to get annoyed and bored with the restrictions and got tired of it, and they also came to realize that toilet paper doesn't actually help against the virus, so they stopped buying all the toilet paper. That way, that happened in Australia as well. I remember for a week it was just
Like white
impossible to
toilet
get.
paper.
I don't know. I don't know.
I would have bought food.
Yeah, toilet paper and soup and noodles and other things like that. People were buying up. Maybe they thought they would have to be stuck in their houses for a long time. I don't know. It was all a bit ridiculous.
I know.
And then then, depending on where you live, various countries sort of either got used to it or continued to sort of fight against it. In Australia, we've settled down to sort of, the getting used to it and let's just get on with it kind of thing. So we've had periodic lockdowns of cities and lockdowns of states. We've had states closing their borders against each other when they need to stop further outbreaks. And it's been really tight and restrictive, but it has worked, and it's kept our case numbers low and our fatalities low while we waited for the vaccine. So our government pursued an elimination strategy, which was try to eliminate the spread of the virus as much as possible while a vaccine is developed, and then we'll be in a better position to open up more further down the track. And life is almost entirely back to normal now in Australia, even though we've just started our vaccine rollout, with the exception, of course, of our periodic lockdowns on an as needed basis and the international travel ban. Mask mandates have varied across the country. They've been implemented at a city and a state level on an as needed basis. There's been no mask mandate in my state here, South Australia. So that wasn't something we never really did. You do need to visit or to wear a mask if you're visiting a testing station. I've been tested a couple of times. So that's one place you definitely have to wear a mask. And some chemists have required you to enter a mask when you go into, to buy medication and stuff. But that's understandable because they get a lot of sick people coming through. And of course, the hospitals are a lot stricter about masks at the moment. But for day-to-day life, you don't normally need a mask. The government also kept schools open. All our schools were kept open. The private
Really?
primary schools, secondary schools, and the universities have all been kept open. So, and that sort of, I know that is a very controversial issue. Different countries have chosen to go down different paths with that. They've closed some or all schools, or only primary schools and secondary schools, but not universities or whatever. All of ours have been kept open. The first reason was that the government decided that closing them would create too great a strain on social services and on families, because that would just be too difficult to try and juggle jobs and looking after kids on a day-to-day basis. It might potentially also overload the private childcare system. And also the government concluded that the risk of infection from children and to children was much less, so they were not considered an at-threat population. So that's what we've done, and that has actually worked. That's worked for us. That's very good. We haven't had any problems there. I know in some countries like America, where they have closed schools, it has been a very different story, and they're facing a lot of problems, economic problems, social problems as a result of that. So yeah, different countries have taken different approaches, and I think we did the right thing. But I can appreciate that it does vary depending on which country you're in and what the case numbers are showing. So for your family then, how has it affected your family personally in terms of work and day-to-day life?
Well, I live with my mother, so she sells bananas. Yeah. So for her, it was restricted, but she could still work because that was necessary food. So, but it's been hard. The sales have been hard. Sometimes they're too expensive to buy, and you have to sell it like even more expensive. And like right now with the with all the strikes that have been happening here, so it's even worse that the pandemic per se. And we also have some properties, so we rent them to a small business, so they have to close, so that affects us.
Yeah, bananas aren't really a thing you could just start selling on eBay, are they? You can't just say, "Oh, I'll just shift my business online." You either sell bananas out in public, or you don't
Yeah,
sell them at all.
exactly.
No one no one wants to pay for bananas in the post. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about the city where you live? What's the general feeling there? How are people feeling about the measures that the government has taken? Do people think that the government's approach has been successful or not terribly good, or what's the general attitude there?
Well, like right now, people hate the government. They hate it. Like it's like Hitler. Like it's a dictatorship. They think that, and I think like they at the beginning they put so many drastic decisions. Like they close everything at all, which causes a lot of bad consequences. Like people break down, like they're so tired. But like the government thought that to increase the economy, they put days without taxes. Like you can buy things without taxes, but a lot of people went outside a lot. So as a consequence, more case of coronavirus. It's like a full cycle, you know.
What do you think the government's long-term plan is? I mean, obviously they've started the vaccine rollout, um, but what kind of support has been offered to people whose lives and whose businesses and whose jobs have been affected by the pandemic and the shutdown measures? Has there been some extra government assistance paid to people, for example?
That's one of the main reasons of the protest. Like they wanted to make everything harder, like with the taxes. So to have the small businesses is gonna be harder. Yeah, I think I know they offer some help for the um low class, you know, like the really low class, but in terms of small businesses, like they're trying to let them open like normally right now, but with the process there has been a lot of vandalism, so it hasn't helped. And as a matter of fact, we know that the government spent a lot of money with the pandemic, a lot, and not just with the healthcare but with guns, weapons. I don't know why, but right now the country's in a really difficult situation because they need money. So that's why they were planning to make us pay more taxes. So kind of hard. I don't know what they're gonna do.
What are families doing then if they can't send their children to school and
Oh,
some of
they're
them
freaking
can't
out.
work? What's happening?
Like with well, they're working online, so they can have their children and keep an eye on them. But the poor children are freaking out because like they have been social distancing, and at that age when they're so little, I think that's horrible. Like you need to socialize with kids, play. And I am a friend of my psychologist, and she has a kid. He's 8 years old, if I'm not wrong, and she says that he's been really depressed and like very anxious. So I think that's really sad.
The unemployment situation must be pretty severe then if a lot
Yeah,
of people have
yeah,
lost their jobs and not much financial support has been offered. In Australia, the government offered some pretty robust support, financial support to small and big businesses and also to families and unemployed people and people who've lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. So there's been a lot of financial support here. So our economy hasn't been hit so badly. Our unemployment rate has gone up a bit and our economy has slowed down, but we are still in a strong financial position. We haven't had a recession in this country since the mid 1990s. So we're still continuing our growth streak. So we've gone, yeah, uh, almost 30 years without a recession, which is a pretty good
yeah,
record. And the pandemic came close to pushing us into recession, but not quite because the government unloaded a lot of money. But I think in the next 2 years, we're going to start to see a bit more of the fallout, some adjustments to various industries, to the way people work, adjustments to, say, industrial relations legislation to address some of the fallout from people who've lost jobs and feel that they either didn't get compensation or didn't get enough compensation. and it's going to change the nature of the workplace for a lot of people. It has placed a lot of stress on people who have a physical shop front rather than people who do their work online. It has pushed a lot of businesses to use online services. A lot of restaurants started doing ordering online and offering takeaway stuff.
Yeah.
So businesses like Uber and Uber Eats have really seen a big boom.
Yeah.
And some businesses haven't been able to transition very rapidly to that, and that's been very, very damaging for them. But overall, we're in a pretty good position. It has meant the government has had to take on a lot of extra debt to actually, because they've needed to borrow money to support this. But at the moment we're in a place where we can manage that amount of debt, so we should be okay. But in countries like Colombia, where you have the added complication of political unrest and social unrest, I can appreciate that the situation is a lot more murky and it's more difficult to know what's going to happen over the next 18 months.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be worse. So God help me.
Has the Colombian government given any sort of timeline about, a return to some kind of normality? Have they said we hope to have the vaccination finished by such and such a date? Schools will be reopening at such and such a time. For example, in Australia, the government has told us that international flights should be reopened by such and such a time. I can't remember what it is. I think international flights should be reopened by the end of this year or early next year, something like that. Do you have any kind of timeline from the government as to when new changes will take place and new goals will be reached?
Well, as far as international flights, we can go as far as the other country accept us. Like there are a lot of people who are traveling to the US to get vaccinated, really. So, and with schools and stuff, it depends of the mayor of the city. Like in Bogota, the mayor said like next month they're gonna return to school, children, universities, normal. But it depends on the protest. Yeah, and the vaccination plan, like I think they say that by the end of this year, but with the protest, we don't know.
So, what's your feeling then about the way that the government has handled the pandemic so far? Are there parts of the approach where you'd say, oh, they did this really well, or some other parts you say they didn't do that terribly well? What do you think the government has got right?
I think like Colombia wasn't prepared for a pandemic. People were not prepared for a pandemic. So every measure that the government has made, like at least at the beginning of the pandemic, I think was necessary. But people were not prepared for that, so they make the government the bad guy, you know. So people are not pretty patient here at all.
Do you feel that the government made the right decision to close down schools and universities?
Yes, because well, at least in some careers, like in case of college, but with kids, yes, because like the cases were increasing a lot at the beginning. So I don't think children can like understand the like gravity of the situation, so they're not gonna keep social distancing, and if the parents are working they're gonna spread the virus to kid, and it's gonna be a full circle. I think at the beginning was necessary, but it gets to a point that it's been a year. So
Do you feel that even allowing for the fact that, yes, governments have had to change their approach throughout the last 12 months, 18 months, as the pandemic has evolved and as conditions have changed, do you feel that the government's response in your country has been relatively consistent, or do you think they've just made some abrupt changes without communicating those very well, or maybe made some hasty decisions, or do you feel that there just hasn't been a lot of consistency overall?
Oh, well, as I said at the beginning, they close everything, but they realize that people can live that way. But I think it's been harder for small businesses, and I think it's not fair because a lot of people are not respecting rules, and the ones who are suffering are the ones who are trying to respect that. So I think that's been really unfair.
When the government first started locking down, what reason did they give for keeping international borders open?
Well, at the beginning they close everything, like, but around a point, I don't even know when they opened frontiers. Like, was 6 months later, if I'm not wrong.
That seems
They
a very
decided to do it.
unusual decision, because if you're going so far as to lock down schools and universities, I don't understand why you would then keep borders open,
Me neither.
um, and at a time when other countries around you are also struggling, and you know there's no clear timeline as to how soon you'll be able to get out of the pandemic. I mean, Australia is an island, and even we closed our borders to make sure that we didn't multiply infections by allowing people in who could potentially be carriers. So, and we implemented a quarantine system as well for people returning from overseas. Now that hasn't been managed very well. It's been okay. It could have been a lot better, and it does need to be more consistent. But at least we had something. I'm just surprised that the Colombian government, after saying we need to shut down schools, also concluded actually we need to keep the borders open as well, so people can keep coming and going. That seems a bit of a weird decision to
Yeah,
me.
I know. Like, nobody understands it. I know at the beginning they open like the national flights, and they try to notice what happened with that, and then eventually they open frontiers.
Yeah, in Australia, as I said, we've even had states shut their own borders against each other from time to time to make sure that we don't spread new outbreaks. Which brings
You
me
know what's
to
funny? Like, even though we didn't have flights at the beginning, like the cities were open. People could travel to towns, and that's what happened. In a big city, people were tired, so they left town, like they left the city to go to small towns, and they spread the disease. And there were really small towns who didn't even have a proper medical care, so a lot of people died. A lot of people got like infected. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's horrible.
so this brings me to another aspect of it, because the government seems to in Colombia seems to have been driven by various political reasons rather than medical reasons. Do they have a medical spokesperson who's been giving regular updates on what the government is doing and explaining to the people why they're doing what they're doing? Is there a
No.
plenty of clarity or transparency around what's happening?
The problem is that like the massive channels that we have here are controlled by some people from the government. So the information is not actually quite accurate, you know?
So there's a strong distrust of government information because you
Yeah.
feel that it's not going to be accurate, and it's difficult for you then to know exactly what stage the country is in because you have little access to accurate information. What about overseas sources like internationally available sources like America's PBS or the British BBC? Are you able to get good information from overseas sources? Are people turning to those sources to find out
Mm.
more about what's going on?
The problem is like not a lot of people speak English here. Not at all. So like they don't understand. So they really go to the massive channels to know information. Or right now, social media.
Yeah, social media is an interesting one because social media is the place where a lot of misinformation has been circulating, not just about
I
the
know.
pandemic, but about vaccines in general. So it's probably fair to say that in the middle of a pandemic, social media is arguably the worst place you could go to get information
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
because people
completely,
were paranoid.
yeah, that's it. It's completely open. It's poorly regulated. Anyone can say anything, and stuff spreads very quickly. So if people are getting a lot of their information from social media because they feel they can't trust their government and they can't get information from overseas sources because they don't speak the language, they're going to be funneled towards just another type of misinformation, the type that circulates on social media. So they're not going to be any better off. Do you think there's a much of a realization of that among Colombians? Do you think that people recognize the danger of social media widely and say, well, we do need to be careful about what we're reading on social media. We need to be careful about what we're sharing. We need to sort of check some of this stuff before we share it. Do you think there's much of an awareness of those dangers?
I think some people are aware of that, but like right now, people think like the government the worst. Like they can't trust it at all, so they trust in social media more, which is really concerning, you know. But like for example, I know the information about the medical care here because of my sister, and my brother-in-law works in the ICU, so like we know firsthand what's happening, but most people don't.
Yeah, people tend to trust their close friends and associates, and of course, they mingle with them regularly on social media. So, if one person gets some bad information and just accepts it uncritically, they can quickly spread that to a small
Yeah.
group of people, and then that spreads wider throughout their social network. And everyone trusts it because it comes from someone they trust, and they feel that they don't have a reason to dig any further and check whether or not it's accurate. And of course, this is how social media perpetuates misinformation. And of course, because social media's algorithms are geared towards showing you the content that it's figured out you're interested in, it will just keep showing you more and more of this stuff because it goes, oh, okay, this is what you want to see. This is what you want to see. Whereas, of course, what you need to see is less of that and more accurate information. But the algorithm has decided you don't want to see that, so it doesn't bother prioritizing that for you. So it's another of these vicious cycles.
I know.
Do you feel that the Colombian government has done much to combat misinformation about the pandemic and about, say, any misinformation that might be spreading about the COVID-19 vaccine? Do you have you heard any misinformation going around about
Oh,
the
yeah,
COVID vaccines?
tons. Well, at the beginning, they said like of course, the vaccination could kill you, or what, that is gonna make you infertile. I don't know why.
And how have your brother and sister felt about this? They're both medical professionals. They're working on the front lines. They're dealing with the effects of this pandemic on a daily basis. They're the ones who are in the best position to know how things are going. They understand the importance of vaccination. They understand that the vaccines are safe and effective. How is this affecting them? What kind of stress is on them at the moment? And how have they been coping with that?
Oh, I feel so bad for them, you know. Like, for example, my brother-in-law, like at the beginning, he was so anxious. Like sometimes we wanted to go to my sister's house to know she was well, but he freaked out. He was like, "Get the hell away from here! Don't you see that people's dying?" Like he was pretty maniac, and I was like, "Dude, no, no! Like we're social distancing. Like we're not hugging. We're just talking 5 feet apart." But yeah, poor guy. Then the situation got better, so he calmed down and he realized that we need to socialize because like this is not gonna finish anytime soon. So like we have to be careful. But then he freaks out. He gets mad. He's like, people are mad, are idiots.
And as medical professionals, what kind of workload are they facing at the moment?
Oh, they work a lot. I don't even know when they are in their houses. Like, it's really hard. Like, right now, I'm glad I didn't study that.
Do you know of any groups, say non-government groups, just say local community groups that provide good information, good accurate information about vaccines and the pandemic in Colombia that work hard to increase people's knowledge and refute the misinformation going around? Some basic maybe a vaccine information page like mine, or a small non-government group maybe that goes to different schools and provides children with some information and maybe some booklets or talks about vaccination and diseases and this kind of thing. Do you know of any?
Not at all, as far as I know. The only one who's putting website like announcements, news, the government. No one else.
So the main voice is the government, which nobody trusts anyway.
Yeah, and but
And
there is one doctor that is pretty famous here, kind of a celebrity, and people go to his live streams, so he answers questions. So it's kind of an influencer, but he's a
oh,
doctor.
what's his name?
Camilo Prieto.
Okay, and is he on YouTube or TikTok or
Um,
Instagram or something?
Facebook. My mom
Facebook.
watches his live streams on Facebook.
And you think he's a good, reliable source of information?
At least people trust him because he's a doctor.
Yeah. So it seems to me that you've got a bit of a problem there. Then there's not enough sort of grassroots pushback against vaccine misinformation and pandemic misinformation. Here in Australia, we've got lots of different groups. Some of them created by parents of children who've died from vaccine preventable diseases, who've said, I want to make sure this doesn't happen to another child. I'm going to start a charitable foundation that helps to spread good information about vaccines, helps to provide education on communicable diseases and this kind of thing. And we've got quite of a few of those. And I know there's plenty in the UK and Canada and the US and other parts of the English speaking world. But if you don't have that kind of thing in Colombia, I can see why people are sort of at the mercy of nonsense from social media, worried because they don't feel they can trust the government, and they're not sort of sure where else they can turn. What about alternative and traditional medicine? Is there much of a tradition of alternative medicine in Colombia? Have people turned to that as the pandemic has kicked up a notch?
I don't know in the pandemic. Like I can speak for my family. Sometimes when we go to traditional medical care and like they don't find a solution, we go to the alternative medical care. So I don't know how they're dealing with COVID right now. Like I'd be lying if I say something because I don't know.
Because in some countries, certainly in some parts of Africa and even in some parts of Eastern Europe, people are turning to traditional medicine or folk remedies for various reasons. Mostly, because of tradition or because they've got distrust of the formal medical system, this kind of thing. And there's even been cases in some of the African countries where they've been advised to do that by government authorities, which is incredibly irresponsible. Where they've said, in Tanzania, for example, people were told you don't need a vaccine. Traditional medicine can solve this pandemic and this kind of thing. And there's been a lot of people whose distrust of the medical system has led them to turn towards alternative remedies or traditional medicine that doesn't actually do anything, but at least in their minds makes them feel better. And yet, unfortunately, of course, because it doesn't have a practical benefit, it's not doing anything to stop the pandemic and potentially simply making it worse. What kind of tradition do you have in the way of traditional medicine in Colombia? What's the history of traditional medicine in Colombia as far as you're aware?
Well, my originally my family is from towns, and Like they have a lot of alternative medicine. Like if you have a bruise, use potatoes. Yeah, and put it on the wood. Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know. It's
Your
funny.
mother
Like,
should start telling people that bananas cure bruises.
oh my god. Yeah, funny, quite funny. Like I don't pay so much attention to it because I think it's really crazy. Like what? Oh, how potatoes? But yeah.
So, given that there is a lot of that around, do you think that people have been turning to that more often with the distrust of government and formal medical structures, or is it pretty much they've been using it just as they always have, and it hasn't actually gone up much because people were already doing it anyway.
As far as I know, like for young people right now, they don't care. They don't care. They don't take care of themselves. They think they're invincible. And if they don't have a close family member who had COVID and they don't know how serious the disease is, like, of course, a lot of people can recover for that, but a lot of people die and in a painful way. Like, my sister told me how they die, and it's bloody painful.
Yeah, and of course, even the people who don't die, the people who recover, many people suffer from permanent side effects of the disease,
Yes,
sometimes
after
organ
that.
damage,
And even
for
my
months
sister and my
afterwards.
brother-in-law had COVID eventually, and I had to go tested because, but I haven't had COVID. So
What do you feel about the people who say, oh, but it has a 99% survival rate or a 98% survival rate or whatever, so we don't have to worry about it because, if you get it, you'll feel sick for a while, but then you'll recover and you won't die. 98% of people don't die. So it's not much of a big deal. It's all been overhyped. How do you feel about that? And how would you respond to someone who said that?
I will be, you're an idiot. And I will tell them like how people really die of it. Like it's not something to joke around. Like it's pretty serious. Like you don't know how it's gonna affect you because it depends of every immune system, you know? For some people it's not that hard. For others it's really painful and it's really hard to recover from it. So like you don't even know how it's gonna happen to you.
What would you like to see the government doing about this pandemic that they're not doing right now?
Mm, I don't know. Like right now, a lot of things are happening here in the country. Like I don't even know how they can start because if they don't fix the political problems, people are gonna keep protesting. So they're gonna keep exposing themselves to the virus. So the vaccination is gonna not gonna work because um they I think at the beginning they made a mistake because they didn't negotiate the vaccines. They were expecting that the donation from other countries, like I think USA is gonna donate to Colombia some vaccines, and it's like you should have thought that before, negotiate that first, because we're getting really like like I said, Pfizer is we're not gonna get Pfizer. At least I'm not gonna get vaccinated with Pfizer because done. And I I don't know if it's right or wrong because like right now we don't even know what's true here. But I've heard with the first dose with Pfizer, the first doses, a lot of people got vaccinated, but it took them at least 2 months or more to get the second doses. So I don't know if that affects the effectivity of the vaccine.
I think with the Pfizer dose, well, with doses of most of them, you're supposed to get your second dose within 28 days.
Yeah,
I
and
know
that
with
didn't happen here because we didn't have vaccines.
so there's been a lot of people left with only one dose and they're still waiting to get their second even after 28 days.
Yes, a lot of people.
Wow. And that's because what the government simply didn't have enough in the first place,
Yes,
or they had problems with distribution, or a bit of both, maybe.
a bit of a.
What would you like to see in the future in terms of public information campaigns about vaccines and about the dangers of pandemics and responses to pandemics, and how do you think public information, public knowledge of the importance of vaccination and the potential dangers of pandemics could be improved? What kind of measures do you think the government and maybe non-government organizations could be taking to address this?
Like, I think it should be like what you told me is happening in Australia. Like, there are small organizations that are spreading the information. Like, oh, maybe there are, but they don't have the publicity or the money for the publicity for people to get to know that there are organizations trying to do that. I think influencers have a big role in that. Like, if you have a lot of followers from Colombia, you have the power to, okay, I'm gonna do some research and I'm gonna tell like proper information because I know people trust me.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if you are a powerful influencer, if you do have, say, several 100,000 subscribers, you are in a position to share information, vital information, to people who already trust you, who will be happy to listen to what you say, and who will be equally happy to share that with people that they know and who trust them. So if people are going on social media, and it's one of the reasons I went on social media, because I knew that was a good place to be to share information about the vaccines, because I know it's a place where people go. And if you are an influencer with a decent sized audience, I do feel that you have a responsibility to make sure the information you're sharing is correct, and maybe even to reach out to organizations that are sharing this information and help to boost their signal by sharing their content and saying, look, how can I help to promote what you are doing? I have an audience of 200,000 followers or subscribers, or all these people listen to me, and I'll quite happily share your content to help make sure it reaches enough people, and people will listen to it because it comes from me, where they might not listen to it if it came from another source. I think there's definitely there's the huge potential for good to come from that if more influencers started to get behind that. Do you have many influencers in Colombia on social media?
I guess so. Now, yes, there are, but they're focusing on music, pranks. Yeah. And I haven't heard them talking about the situation, like, no, properly. Like, they just give an opinion and they move on.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons I wanted to interview a few people from YouTube to sort of find out what's going on there. So the first YouTuber I interviewed was a guy called Jeff Holiday, who has a very good channel debunking anti-science views and anti-vaccine views, and he has a very big channel, and he shares excellent information and does a great job of supporting pro-vax position and refuting alternative medicine claims and other forms of pseudoscience. And if we could get more people like that, say on Instagram or TikTok, where I know some medical professionals are starting to push back and to spread good information, I think that has the potential to do a great deal of good. And it would be exciting to see more young people getting involved with that, because, of course, they're the main audience and the main drivers of of viral content. So I think that would be extremely helpful, and certainly it would help to um, address the problem of people not being able to find good information in their own language, because they would have their own local influencers sharing this content in their own language, and it would be coming from people they trust. So I do think there's huge potential for that to happen, and it's starting to happen, but it would be great to see it a bit more organized and a bit more widespread, especially in the non-English speaking world. which I
Mhm.
think there's clearly a great need for it.
Yes.
Well, Vanessa, thank you very much for spending this time with me. I have really appreciated our conversation, and thank you for your insights into the situation in Colombia, both with regard to the pandemic in general and also the ongoing political situation. I hope you stay safe, take great care, and
Thank you.
I hope the situation in Colombia calms down a bit, and I wish you all the best with the pandemic.